Canada just turned on a brand new aluminum factory that makes metal cleaner than anything America has ever built. The United States tried to hurt Canada with tariffs, but instead, Canada built something so powerful that American manufacturers are now begging for it. The factory is running, the metal is flowing, and Washington has no answer. In 2026, Rio Tinto stood in the Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean region of Quebec and formally commissioned what the company described as the first major primary aluminum project built in the Western world in more than a decade. The $1.5 billion US AP60 smelter expansion at Complex Arvida is now producing aluminum. Commissioning began in March. All 96 new electrolysis pots are expected to be fully operational by December 31st, 2026. And the metal this smelter produces will emit 1/6 of the greenhouse gas emissions per ton of any comparable facility in the world. The United States imposed a 50% tariff on this aluminum. Rio Tinto has successfully started commissioning its US $1.5 billion AP60 smelter expansion at Complex Arvida in Quebec, marking a major milestone for the deployment of its state-of-the-art, low-carbon aluminium smelting technology. The startup, which began in March, is expected to be completed by the end of 2026, with all 96 new pots operating. This will increase the plant's production capacity by approximately 160,000 metric tons of primary aluminium annually, for a total of 220,000 metric tons produced with the AP60 technology. Those numbers define the commercial scale of what is now operating. 160,000 additional metric tons of primary aluminum production per year. A total facility capacity of 220,000 metric tons annually once the expansion reaches full operation. To put that in context, the entire United States produced approximately 720,000 metric tons of primary aluminum in 2024, a number that has been declining for decades as American smelters closed in the face of high energy costs and global competition. A single Quebec expansion adds 22% of American annual primary aluminum output, in a market where the United States currently imports approximately 2/3 of the aluminum it consumes and sources the majority of those imports from Canada. The AP60 technology that Rio Tinto's own research and development teams developed is the specific reason this smelter matters beyond its production volume. When combined with the hydropower used at Rio Tinto's operations in Canada, AP60 generates 1/6 of the greenhouse gas emissions per ton of aluminium compared with the industry average, and half the emissions of the technology currently used at the adjacent older Arvida smelter. It will deliver significant improvements, including an expected reduction of up to 90% in fine particulate matter, 1/6 of industry average emissions. That figure is not a marginal improvement over existing low-carbon production. It is a step change that places AP60 aluminum in a different commercial category than virtually any other primary aluminum produced at scale anywhere in the world. Quebec's hydroelectric grid powers the electrolysis process that separates aluminum from its oxide. The electricity arrives without carbon emissions. The AP60 technology then reduces the emissions from the electrolysis process itself to 1/6 of what conventional smelting technology generates, even with clean power. The result is primary aluminum that carries a documented carbon intensity that European buyers operating under carbon border adjustment mechanisms and Asian buyers subject to domestic carbon pricing cannot obtain from any competing source at comparable volume. For 100 years, Quebec has been at the heart of the aluminum industry, and with AP60, Rio Tinto is now strongly positioned for decades to come with one of the most advanced smelting technologies operating at commercial scale, said Jérôme Pécresse, Chief Executive of Rio Tinto Aluminium and Lithium. The expansion was approved in 2023 and received up to $113 million in financial support from the Quebec provincial government. Construction generated more than 1,500 jobs at peak activity, and approximately 100 permanent employees will work at the expanded smelter. The permanent employment figure is modest for a $1.5 billion US facility because modern aluminum smelting is heavily automated. The economic value of the facility lies in its production output and the industrial ecosystem it sustains, not in its direct headcount. The AP60 expansion sits alongside a separate but directly connected Rio Tinto initiative in the same Quebec region. Rio Tinto is moving forward on a research and development project to extract primary gallium from its alumina refining process in Quebec with a conditionally approved contribution from Natural Resources Canada under the Global Partnerships Initiative. Gallium is one of the strategic minerals whose export China restricted in 2023 as part of its response to Western semiconductor export controls, creating a supply chain crisis across defense, electronics, 5G telecommunications, and semiconductor manufacturing that has not been resolved. Rio Tinto's Quebec refining operations produce alumina, the aluminum oxide that the AP60 smelter then converts to primary aluminum through electrolysis. The gallium extraction project would recover gallium as a byproduct of that alumina refining process, creating a North American supply source for a critical technology metal whose primary source is currently China. The AP60 technology itself supports a longer-term project that makes the Quebec aluminum cluster's strategic significance even clearer. The Elysis joint venture, a partnership between Rio Tinto and Alcoa, supported by Apple and the governments of Canada and Quebec, is developing carbon-free aluminum smelting technology that would eliminate carbon emissions from the electrolysis process entirely. AP60 is described in Rio Tinto's own materials as supporting the transition to carbon-free aluminum electrolysis being developed by Elysis in Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean. The R&D for a technology that could eliminate the final remaining carbon emissions from aluminum production is being conducted in the same Quebec region where the AP60 expansion just went live. The American tariff context is what makes the timing of the May 29th commissioning announcement commercially pointed. The United States imposed a 50% Section 232 tariff on Canadian aluminum in June 2025. That tariff applies to every ton of AP60 aluminum crossing the Canadian border into American manufacturing plants. The stated purpose of the tariff was to protect American aluminum producers and reduce dependence on Canadian supply. The documented result is that the only primary aluminum producer to commission a major new smelter in the Western world in more than a decade is a Canadian facility producing aluminum at 1/6 of industry average carbon emissions. And the 160,000 additional tons that facility adds to annual production now face a 50% tariff when they cross into the country that imports most of its aluminum and has no comparable domestic production project anywhere on the horizon. Canada is the world's 4th largest primary aluminum producer, after China, India, and Russia. Quebec is home to 9 of Canada's 10 aluminum smelters. The AP60 expansion at Arvida adds 160,000 tons to a national production base that already supplies the majority of American aluminum imports from a province whose hydroelectric grid and industrial cluster make it the most cost-competitive and lowest carbon primary aluminum production region in the Western world. The tariff applies regardless. The broader Quebec aluminum cluster surrounding the Arvida expansion describes an industrial ecosystem that American tariff policy cannot replicate through import duties alone. Rio Tinto operates multiple smelters across the Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean region, all powered by the same hydroelectric grid that gives AP60 its carbon advantage. Alcoa operates the Deschambault and Baie-Comeau smelters in Quebec. ABI, a joint venture between Rio Tinto and Alcoa, operates the Bécancour smelter. Together, Quebec's 9 aluminum smelters represent the most concentrated low-carbon primary aluminum production cluster in the Western Hemisphere. The Elysis carbon-free smelting research is happening inside that same cluster. The gallium extraction project is happening inside that same cluster. And the AP60 technology that Rio Tinto just commissioned at Arvida is now being evaluated for potential deployment in other regions globally, with Quebec serving as the commercial reference case that every other jurisdiction considering primary aluminum investment will study before committing capital anywhere else.